My wife was gone for 3 months and now wants me to take her back. I said no, but now everyone seems against me. Advice needed, strangers. Let me tell you, life has thrown me some serious curveballs, and I'm at a crossroads, desperate for some sound advice. 7 years ago, I married the girl who seemed like she'd stepped straight out of my wildest dreams, Denise. We'd been dating for a blissful 2 years before tying the knot, and back then, it truly felt like a fairy tale come true. Every moment we spent together was filled with laughter, shared secrets, and the kind of love that makes you believe in happily ever after. But as soon as we said "I do," it was like a switch flipped. Denise started to withdraw into herself, constantly feeling down and out. It was heartbreaking to watch the light in her eyes dim. At first, I thought it was just a phase, the adjustment period after getting married. But as the weeks turned into months, and the months into years, it became clear that something deeper was going on. I finally managed to convince her to see a doctor, who, in turn, referred her to a therapist. That's when we got the diagnosis: depression, stemming from unresolved issues in her past that she'd been trying to bury. I was determined to be her rock, her unwavering support. Despite working a grueling 40-hour week, I took on most of the household chores. I'd come home exhausted, only to be greeted by a messy house. But instead of complaining, I'd roll up my sleeves and start cleaning, then whip up dinner. All I asked of Denise was to focus on getting better. I told her I was there for her, whenever she needed to talk, to unload the burdens weighing her down. But as the days passed, it seemed like she was sinking deeper into her funk. She'd barely get out of bed, just lying there complaining about everything: herself, me, the world around us. There was no intimacy left in our relationship. No stolen kisses, no cuddles on the couch, and it had been ages since we'd last gone out on a date. My social life took a nosedive too. Whenever I tried to meet up with my buddies to blow off some steam, Denise would call me, her voice trembling with fear, saying she needed me. So, I'd rush back home, abandoning any chance of having a normal life outside of our four walls. I was trapped in a cycle of work, housework, and emotional exhaustion, all while hoping against hope that she'd snap out of it, and we could reclaim the life we'd once dreamed of. For months ago, Denise got a new therapist. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the turning point we'd been praying for. But 3 months ago, my world came crashing down even further. That new therapist suggested Denise needed some time away from me. Apparently, since her depression had started not long after we got married, I might be part of the problem. When she told me, it was like a sledgehammer to the gut. I was crushed. Doubt started to seep into every corner of my mind. I blamed myself, wondering if I'd done something wrong all along. Was I really the cause of her misery? I worried incessantly, replaying every interaction we'd had in the past few years. But beneath all that self-loathing, there was a growing sense of resentment. I'd given up so much for her. Years of my life had been sacrificed, working like a dog to keep our home running while she lay in bed, seemingly unappreciative. Despite these conflicting emotions, I tried to talk it through with her. I begged her to reconsider, to see that we could get through this together. But she'd made up her mind. She decided to leave and stay with her mother, saying she needed space and that I might be the root of her depression. That whole argument is now a blur in my head. All I remember is the pain and confusion. The next month was pure hell. I called her constantly, reaching out to her family too, begging them to convince her to come back. I humiliated myself, apologizing for things I wasn't even sure I'd done wrong. There were nights when I was so close to giving up on everything. I felt like I had nothing left to live for. But as that agonizing month passed, something unexpected happened. I started to notice a change when I came home. It was quiet. For the first time in years, I didn't have to immediately start cleaning or cooking. I could actually relax. I picked up my old hobbies again, things I hadn't touched in ages. I realized how much I'd missed them, how they used to bring me joy. And then, I even dared to call my buddies up. We met for a beer, and it was like a breath of fresh air. As we laughed and shared stories, I slowly came to a startling realization. I'd been miserable for a long time. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I didn't love Denise the way I used to. I felt like my youth had been wasted, trapped in a loveless, thankless marriage. I was more of a caretaker than a husband. But then, just as I was starting to come to terms with this new reality, Denise called. When the phone rang and I saw Denise's name on the screen, my heart skipped a beat. Part of me was almost relieved to hear from her, while another part dreaded what she might say. I took a deep breath and answered, my hand trembling slightly. On the other end, she was sobbing uncontrollably. She told me she'd made a huge mistake. Her words came out in a jumbled mess between her tears, but I could make out that she was blaming herself for listening to the therapist so blindly. She said she loved me more than anything and couldn't bear the thought of losing me. For a moment, I was flooded with a rush of emotions. All the memories of our good times together came rushing back. I remembered our first date, how nervous we both were, and how we ended up talking until the sun came up. I thought about the way she used to smile at me, that smile that could light up a room. In that split second, I wanted to say yes, to tell her to come back and that we'd figure things out. But then, reality hit me like a ton of bricks. I thought about the past few months, the loneliness, and the newfound freedom I'd experienced. I remembered how exhausted I'd been, constantly trying to hold our relationship together while she seemed to give up. I couldn't just forget all that pain and jump back in. So, before I could second-guess myself, I blurted out that she had left me and I was done. I told her I'd be getting divorce papers. It was like a dam had broken inside me, and all the pent-up frustration and hurt came pouring out. I told her I'd wasted enough time, and this last desperate call of hers was the final straw. After I hung up, I dropped the phone and collapsed onto the couch. I started crying, the tears a mix of sadness, anger, and relief. Sadness for what our relationship had become, anger at the situation we were in, and relief that I'd finally been honest with myself and her. But as the tears subsided, doubt started to creep in. Was I really making the right decision? I couldn't help but feel horrible, like I was abandoning her when she was at her most vulnerable. After all, she was dealing with depression. I questioned myself, wondering if I was being selfish. My family's words echoed in my head. They all thought I was making a mistake, that I should give her another chance. Marriage was supposed to be for better or worse, they said, and I was clearly running away at the first sign of trouble. I tossed and turned all night, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. One minute, I was convinced I'd done the right thing. The next, I was imagining Denise all alone, suffering, and it tore me up inside. I knew I needed to make a decision, but I had no idea what that decision should be. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and eyes swollen from crying. I felt like I hadn't slept a wink, my mind still reeling from the emotional turmoil of the previous night. I dragged myself out of bed, the weight of my decision, or lack thereof, bearing down on me. I went through the motions of my day, but it was like I was in a daze. Work was a blur, my colleagues' conversations passing over me as I sat at my desk, lost in thought. Every now and then, I'd snap back to reality, realizing I hadn't heard a word they'd said. I knew I had to get my act together, but it was easier said than done. Back at home, I tried to distract myself. I turned on the TV, flipping through channels aimlessly, but nothing held my attention. I picked up a book, only to find myself reading the same paragraph over and over. It was as if my mind was incapable of focusing on anything but Denise and the mess our relationship had become. I started to think about all the things I'd said and done, not just in the past few days, but over the course of our entire marriage. Had I really been as supportive as I thought? Maybe I could have done more to understand her depression, to help her through it. But then again, I'd given up so much of myself. I'd sacrificed my social life, my hobbies, my peace of mind. Was it fair that I should keep doing that indefinitely? I decided I needed to have a serious talk with myself. I sat down at the kitchen table, a pen and paper in front of me. I started making a list of the pros and cons of taking Denise back. On one side, I wrote down all the good memories we had, the love we'd once shared, and the possibility of rebuilding our relationship. On the other side, I listed the pain, the exhaustion, and the fear of falling back into the same pattern. As I stared at the list, I realized it wasn't that simple. There were so many emotions and factors involved. I couldn't just base my decision on a piece of paper, but it was a start. It made me see that I needed to have an open and honest conversation with Denise, not just for her sake, but for mine too. So, 2 days ago, I summoned the courage to call her. My heart was racing as I asked her to come to our home. I told her we needed to talk about everything, our relationship, her depression, and what the future might hold. She agreed, her voice sounding small and hesitant. The hours leading up to her arrival were agonizing. I cleaned the house, not because I wanted to impress her, but because I needed something to do to keep my mind occupied. I paced back and forth, rehearsing what I was going to say. I knew this conversation could change everything, and the pressure was almost unbearable. When the knock finally came at the door, my heart leaped into my throat. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and opened it. There she stood, Denise, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. Her eyes were red and puffy, evidence of the tears she'd been shedding. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence thick with unspoken words and years of pent-up emotions. I stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. As she walked past me, I caught a whiff of her familiar perfume, and it sent a pang through my heart. We made our way to the living room and sat down, an awkward distance between us. I cleared my throat, not quite sure where to begin. The conversation started slowly, hesitantly. I told her how exhausted I'd been, not just physically from working and taking care of the house, but emotionally from carrying the weight of our relationship on my shoulders. I unloaded everything I'd been feeling for years, how I'd felt like a doormat, constantly giving and getting little in return. I told her she wasn't the person I'd married, that the vibrant, happy woman I'd fallen in love with seemed to have vanished. Denise listened quietly, her eyes fixed on the floor. Every now and then, she'd nod, as if she was absorbing the blows of my honesty. When I finally paused, she looked up at me, and I saw the pain and regret in her eyes. She admitted that she knew I'd been unhappy, that she'd been a terrible partner. She said she'd been so caught up in her own depression that she hadn't realized how much she was taking me for granted. She told me about her time away, how it had been a wake-up call. She'd seen how much I meant to her, and how she'd let things slide. She said she'd been afraid of getting better, fearing that she'd have to face all the things she'd been avoiding. But now, she was determined to change. We talked for hours, the conversation veering from painful admissions to hopeful plans. At one point, we ended up hugging for what felt like an eternity. It was a strange mix of comfort and awkwardness, as if we were both clinging to the past and reaching for the future. When we finally pulled apart, Denise looked at me with pleading eyes and asked me to give her one more chance. I hesitated. I knew the risks. I'd been down this road before, and I was scared of getting hurt again. But as I looked at her, I saw a glimmer of the old Denise, the one I'd loved. So, I told her I'd be willing to try, but it wouldn't be like before. I laid down my conditions. I told her she had to get a part-time job. It didn't matter what it was, as long as she showed up, looked presentable, and gave it her all. I wanted her to have a sense of purpose outside of our home, something to boost her self-esteem. Secondly, since I love going to the gym and found it a great stress reliever, she'd have to come with me at least 3 times a week. I hoped it would help her get in shape and feel better about herself. Thirdly, while she was staying with her parents, she had to pitch in and help around the house. No more hiding away in her room. Groceries needed to be bought, dishes washed, and the vacuuming done. It was about taking responsibility. Fourthly, we were going to go on a date once a week. No more excuses about not feeling like it or being self-conscious. We needed to relearn how to have fun together. Fifthly, we'd try couples counseling again. I knew we needed an outside perspective to work through our issues. Sixth, she had to find a new therapist and be honest with them. And if they prescribed medication, she had to take it, right in front of me, to ensure compliance. To my surprise, Denise agreed without hesitation. In fact, just 2 days later, her dad called to tell me she'd been helping around the house and was actively looking for jobs. It seemed like she was serious about making a change. I know there's a long and rocky road ahead. There's a good chance this won't work out, and I'm trying not to get my hopes up too high. But I also feel like I owe it to myself and to our past to give it one last shot. Maybe I'm an idiot for believing in second chances, but I'm willing to take that risk. Only time will tell if we can rebuild what we once had or if we're doomed to repeat our mistakes.